Now, there are two kinds of mythology. There's what is called the right-hand path, the mythology of the village compound that keeps you fixed in the context of your world. And you grow up here, you live as expected, you live a dignified, successful, and in a rich society, a richly developed life. On the other hand, you may flip out. You may have a feeling of incongruities here. This doesn't go with me. And then you move out. You move out into a realm of danger. This is known as the left-hand path. You follow the way of your own bliss.
For most people entering occultism for the first time, the terms the left-hand path and the right-hand path arrive already poisoned. They come wrapped in moral judgment, pop culture aesthetics, and internet mythology. One is framed as dark, rebellious, dangerous, and even evil. The other is portrayed as safe, holy, sanitized, and spiritually superior. This framing is not ancient. It is modern, reductive, and fundamentally ignorant of how esoteric systems actually work. In their original context, these paths were never moral categories. They were functional ones, descriptions of how power moves through the human vessel and whether that power is conserved or lost. Welcome to Hidden America, where magic meets cybernetics and the code behind reality reveals itself. Part 1. Tantra as technology. Now, to understand this, one must return to Tantra, not as it is marketed today, but as it was practiced and understood within the deeper strata of Eastern mystery tradition. Tantra was never a philosophy of indulgence, nor was it a religion of pleasure. It was a technology. The Sanskrit root tan means expansion. Tra means instrument. Tantra is the instrument of expansion, a method by which consciousness stretches beyond its conditioned loops and habitual constraints. It is not about sensation. It is about liberation from unconscious repetition. The ordinary human being is trapped inside cycles, biological urges, emotional reflexes, psychological scripts inherited from family, culture, and trauma. These cycles repeat endlessly, draining vitality while offering the illusion of satisfaction. Tantra intervenes at the root of this loop, not by suppressing desire, but by mastering it. But let's quickly slow this down. I want to thank Metallicus for sponsoring this video. I don't take sponsors lightly, and I avoid platforms tied to centralized control or systems designed to consolidate power upwards. That's why Metallicus is the only digital banking network I'm willing to put my name next to. As always, in Metallicus, I trust. Now let's get back into the video. Part 2, the engine of creation. The most potent form of desire in the human organism is sexual energy. Sex is not incidental to spiritual work. It is foundational. Long before Freud, endocrinology, or neuroscience, initiates understood that sexual force is the engine of creation itself. It is the same power that forms bodies, drives instincts, fuels imagination, and underwrites emotional attachment. To work with sex consciously is to work with the raw material of existence, the same force that Kabbalists located in Yesod, the foundation, the generative engine of the tree of life. This is why sacred sexuality appears everywhere once one knows how to see it, in Gnostic sacraments, in Egyptian temples, in Masonic rites, alchemical marriages, in the veiled language of the Song of Songs, and even in forms within medieval Christianity. The suppression of sex was never the original doctrine. It was a later control mechanism. The original teaching was far more dangerous. Sex must be mastered, not denied. Part 3. The right-hand path. Containment. The distinction between the right-hand path and the left-hand path emerges precisely here. The right-hand path, traditionally called Daka Sankara, is the path of containment. It assumes that sexual energy is too powerful to be released indiscriminately. Instead, it must be refined, circulated, and sublimated. The body becomes a closed circuit rather than an open drain. Desire is not extinguished, it is transmuted. The lover does not seek release, but assent. The sexual act becomes a sacrament, not an escape. In this mode of practice, love governs will. The heart is the center of gravity. Instinct does not dominate consciousness. Consciousness leads instinct upward. Sexual polarity is preserved, but its purpose is no longer discharge, it is generation. The energy that would ordinarily be expelled outward is redirected inward and upward, from the loins toward the crown. In Kabbalistic terms, Yesod is no longer a point of loss, but a point of circulation, feeding upward through Dath, the hidden gate of knowledge, rather than leaking outward into repetition and decay. Enlightenment, symbolized by Kether, is not reached by severing the lower forces, but by refining them until they become light. This is what later Western alchemists called the philosopher's stone, not a physical object, but a stabilized state of consciousness born from a conserved creative force. This is also why so many authentic initiatory systems demanded discipline before power. Without containment, illumination collapses into destruction. Without structure, Dath becomes a void rather than a bridge. Part 4. The left-hand path. Expenditure. The left-hand path, Vamakara, is different, not because it is immoral, but because it is volatile. It works by transgression rather than refinement. Instead of containment, it uses rupture. Instead of gradual ascent, it pursues immediate intensity. Sexual energy is released outward, often deliberately, sometimes violently, in order to break psychic structures and force altered states of awareness. On the tree of life, this manifests as continual drainage from Yesod without reintegration. Power descends into the shells rather than rising for the crown. You can see this leakage in ordinary life. The man who feels driven all day but empty at night. The constant need for stimulation, scrolling, porn, chasing validation, followed by a dull fatigue that never quite resolves. The sense of being pulled outward by impulses rather than directed from within. This is not exhaustion, it is leakage. In its original tantric context, this path was never meant for novices. It was reserved for advanced practitioners who had already mastered discipline, polarity, and energetic containment. Only then could transgression be used without collapse. The modern idea that the left-hand path is for beginners is catastrophic inversion of the original doctrine. When practiced without prior mastery, left-hand techniques do not liberate, they addict. They burn fuel rather than refine it. They generate psychic openings without structural integrity. The result is not godhood, but fragmentation, emotional instability, compulsive desire, ego inflation, and eventual exhaustion. In Kabbalistic language, the practitioner mistakes descent into the klapoth for ascent, confusing intensity with illumination. In practical terms, this looks like intensity without stability, short bursts of motivation followed by crashes, obsession mistaken for purpose, emotional highs that feel profound in the moment but leave no lasting structure behind. The system spikes, then collapses again and again, and this is where most people stall. But if you're someone who wants to go deeper than what YouTube allows, that work exists elsewhere. YouTube members and Patreons get access to all videos first. My Patreon has over 600 archived posts. It's not just an ordinary Patreon. It's a living, breathing mystery school. Not only did I just drop a new ceramic mug, I also released a 4-piece clothing line called the Aeonic Collection, 3 sweatshirts and 1 t-shirt. These aren't just physical objects. They're reminders of integration through the Hidden America current. Now let's get back into it. Part 5, the fault line in occultism. This is why so much modern occultism feels hollow, chaotic, and performative. It borrows the aesthetics of the left-hand path without the discipline of the right-hand path that once preceded it. What remains is not initiation, but combustion. Between these two poles lies what might be called the gray zone, where most people actually operate. Here, sexual activity is neither fully conscious nor fully unconscious. There is some intention, some spiritual language, some attempt at awareness, but no real mastery. Energy leaks constantly. Practices contradict themselves. Results are inconsistent. Yesod functions as a drain rather than a foundation, and Dath never stabilizes into knowing. The difference between white and black Tantra, often framed morally, is better understood thermodynamically. One increases coherence, the other increases entropy. One builds structure, the other consumes it. Neither is inherently evil, but only one leads to sustained transformation. The tree of life itself is a diagram of this principle. Ascent requires circulation. Leakage produces collapse. Western occult figures like Aleister Crowley did not invent sexual magic. They exposed fragments of it. What Tantra encoded symbolically, Crowley translated into operative terms. He understood that sexual force is not metaphorical, but mechanical. A generative current that can be directed towards manifestation, altered states, or the restructuring of consciousness itself. His central insight was correct. Sexual energy, properly harnessed, is the most efficient instrument of will available to the human organism. But what Crowley left ambiguous, whether by design or limitation, was the cost of misapplication. He revealed the key without fully stabilizing the method. In practice, much of what followed in his wake emphasized intensity over containment, operation over integration. The result was power access but not retained. Samuel Anwar removed that ambiguity entirely. Where Crowley disclosed, Anwar imposed law. For him, the question was not whether sexual energy could produce results. It clearly could, but whether those results led to ascent rather than depletion. His answer was absolute. Unconscious discharge is lost, not symbolically, but structurally. The very substance required for transformation is expelled before it can be refined. This is not moralism, it is mechanics. The difference between these two approaches marks a fault line in modern occultism. One treats sexual force as a tool to generate experience. The other treats it as a substance to be conserved, transmuted, and fixed into higher states of being. One opens the gate, the other builds the vessel capable of surviving it. Most modern systems inherit the first and ignore the second. That is why they produce flashes of insight without consistency, access without embodiment, intensity without structure. The current is real. The question is whether it is being used to ascend or simply being spent. Semen in esoteric psychology is crystallized consciousness. To spill it unconsciously is to discard the raw material of awakening. Gopi Krishna echoed this insight from a biological angle, likening sexual energy to nuclear power capable of illuminating a city or annihilating it, depending on how it is handled. The Gnostics understood this long before either of them. Their sacraments were not celibate rituals but polar unions. Their myth of Adam and Eve was not about sin, but about division. When polarity was internal, there was no death. When it was split and externalized, entropy entered the system, and death followed. This is why true initiation was always hidden, not because it was shameful, but because it was dangerous in the wrong hands. The bedroom was not excluded from the temple. It was the inner sanctum of it. Sex was the first ritual, the original sacrament, the engine of both creation and transcendence. Seen from this perspective, the left-hand path and the right-hand path are not opposing religions. They are different ways of handling the same force. One contains it, the other expels it. One refines, the other burns. One leads to stable illumination, the other to rapid, unstable power. Tantra was never about pleasure, it was about freedom. But freedom demands mastery, and mastery begins not in belief nor in rebellion, but in learning how to move power from Yesod to Kether without loss, how to cross Dath without falling, and how to hold fire long enough for it to become light. Part 6. The alchemical lens, the wet path and the dry path. Now the same mechanics can be seen through an older alchemical lens, the wet and dry path. Different language, same engine. What matters is that the wet versus dry is not moral, just as the left versus right is not moral. It is about how forces moves, where it is retained, and whether it is conserved or dispersed. In classical alchemy, the dry path was always associated with fire, fixation, ascent, and coagulation. The wet path with dissolution, liquidity, fermentation, and putrefaction. When you map that directly onto sexual alchemy, the correspondences become obvious. The dry path is the path of retention. It is the discipline of heat without leakage. Sexual force is ignited but not expelled. The fire is held internally, circulated, intensified, and slowly raised. Over time, it fixes consciousness into a higher, more coherent state. This is why dry operations were described as slow, demanding, and dangerous if rushed. You are cooking the substance from within. There is no shortcut. This is the Grail path, the monk knight path, the true hermetic ascent. Retention, when it begins to stabilize, feels different than most. Not repression, but pressure, like heat building behind the sternum, clarity sharpening instead of dulling. Attention holds longer. Decisions carry weight. There is less urgency, but more direction. The energy no longer demands release. It becomes available for use. Energetically, the dry path corresponds to the right-hand path of Tantra. In white Tantra, love governs will. The heart regulates desire. The body becomes a sealed hermetic vessel. The libido is not denied. It is pressurized. What rises is not lust, but light. In Kabbalistic terms, Yesod is not drained. It is transfigured. The crown is fed by what would otherwise be spilled into time. The wet path, by contrast, is the path of release. It works through dissolution rather than fixation. In alchemy, this meant repeated cycles of death, decay, fermentation, and rebirth. In sexual magic, it manifests as discharge, orgasm, blood, fluids, intensity, rupture. Power is generated through breakdown. Barriers are shattered. Psychic doors are forced open. This maps cleanly onto the left-hand path of Tantra. In Black Tantra, will governs love. Desire drives the operation. The practitioner uses excess, taboo, shock, or saturation to destabilize the psyche and access altered states. The path is fast. It is intoxicating. It can produce immediate results, but it consumes substance. Every wet operation sacrifices matter to produce effect. This is why the wet path was always considered unstable unless mastered. Liquids evaporate, fire escapes. Without fixation, nothing remains. In alchemical language, the wet path creates movement, but struggles to produce permanence. In tantric language, it generates experiences, but not necessarily transformation. Part 7, the missing step, fixation. Here is the crucial initiatory key most people never receive. The wet path was traditionally used to prepare the matter. The dry path was used to perfect it. You dissolve first, then you fix. Solve itu coagulation. In authentic systems, the wet path was never the end, it was a phrase. The problem in modern occultism is that people stop at dissolution and mistake chaos for liberation. They melt the ego, but never rebuild the vessel. They open gates, but never learn to hold what enters. This is why the old texts warn that moisture without fire leads to rot, and fire without moisture leads to ash. The great work requires both, but in the correct sequence and proportion. Our earlier observations about entropy and coherence fit perfectly here. The wet path increases entropy. The dry path increases coherence. Entropy can liberate, but only coherence can sustain. One breaks chains, the other builds wings. Here is the key that was never meant to be obvious, the step most modern systems omit, and the reason why so many practitioners stall in cycles of intensity without transformation. The wet path was never the destination. It was preparation. Dissolution comes first. Fixation comes after. In the classical operation, the matter had to be broken down, softened, opened, stripped of rigidity. This is the role of the wet path, to dissolve this false structure, to expose the raw substances beneath conditioning. Without this phase, nothing real can be transformed. The vessel remains too dense, too fixed in existing patterns. But dissolution alone achieves nothing lasting. If the process stops there, the result is not liberation, but instability. The form is broken, but nothing replaces it. The practitioner becomes fluid without direction, open without containment, capable of experience, but incapable of holding it. This is where the dry path begins. What was once dissolved must now be fixed. What was opened must now be sealed. The same force that broke structures must be turned inward, concentrated, and raised. Heat replaces moisture. Pressure replaces release. The vessel is rebuilt, not as it was, but as something capable of sustaining higher voltage without collapse. This is the phase that most people never reach. Modern practitioners dissolve repeatedly through excess, through intensity, through continual discharge, but never transition to fixation. That mistakes the breakdown of the old self for the completion of the work. They open the gate, but never construct the architecture required to stand inside it. Part 8, the final distinction. The old texts warned this explicitly, though in veiled language. Moisture without fire rots. Fire without moisture burns to ash. The great work requires both, but not simultaneously and not indefinitely. This is the sequence: break, then build, dissolve, then fix, open, then contain. Miss this and the entire system collapses into repetition. Understand it and the paths reconcile. Wet prepares the substance, dry perfects it, and only what is perfected can endure. This also clarifies why so many left-hand path practitioners burn out, spiral, or become trapped in compulsive cycles. They are running wet operations indefinitely. Constant release, constant dissolution, constant expenditure of sexual and psychic substance without ever transitioning to fixation. The fuel runs out, the nervous system frays, the psyche destabilizes. Meanwhile, those on the dry path often appear slower, quieter, even boring to outsiders. But Their power accumulates, it condenses, it lasts. This is why real initiates are rarely flashy. Fire that does not leak does not announce itself. They speak less, but when they act, it lands. They don't chase attention, attention organizes around them. One spends itself and needs to be constantly refilled. The other accumulates and becomes harder to disrupt. Over time, this difference becomes visible in posture, in speech, in the ability to act without hesitation or noise. The deepest synthesis, and this is where Tantra, alchemy, and Gnosticism finally converge, is that true mastery requires the ability to move between wet and dry consciously, to ignite without spilling essence, to descend without forgetting ascent. But only one path leads to immortality of consciousness. The dry path does not feel like freedom at first, it feels like restraint. But what actually builds is sovereignty, freedom from compulsion, freedom from entropy, freedom from unconscious repetition. In the end, this distinction is exact. The wet path spends energy to experience power. The dry path refines energy to become it. One leaks and repeats, the other sails and ascends. Every real tradition converges here, away from discharge toward containment, away from spectacle toward silence, not pleasure, not belief, power held long enough to become light.